mother of 3 beautiful children, juggling parenting and wife duties with traveling and Islamic research. Her responsibilities also extend to tending to disabled family relatives, which prompted the reason why we're having this discussion. So in the studio, I'm delighted to have Sister Zahra Al Alawi. Sister Zahra, assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
How are you? Hope all is well?
Alhamdulillah, all is good.
Many thanks for coming onto the show.
Thank you.
So I guess, look, just to kickstart, I think I'd love to understand a bit more about your brother, what he's like, and the opportunities. And we discussed this off air. The reason why I say opportunities there are in looking after him and not the challenges, but we'll talk about that in a second. But tell us about your brother.
Yeah, so my brother, his name is Sayyid Ali. He's in fact only 4 years younger than me.
Oh.
He was born with Down syndrome, which is a chromosome. When a child is born with an extra chromosome, which is chromosome 21, it causes physical disability or physical changes as well as intellectual disability.
Okay.
So it affects the mind and the body. So that is kind of his diagnosis. But at the same time, he is honestly the most loving individual I could ever wish for. And I always say, people sometimes, I think it's all about perspective, and I'm so happy you talked about perspective.
Yes.
Because when people sometimes hear you have a sibling with a disability, they say, oh, I'm sorry, or anything like that. But in my sense, I always think, why are you sorry? Like, what exactly are you sorry for? He brings so much joy to our life. He brings so much happiness to our life. And he, honestly, I think he has changed us growing up. I'm so happy I grew up with a sibling with a disability because I feel like it has changed me. It's made me more empathetic, more humility.
We've got a photo of him actually. Is that him was that him in Salah?
That was him in Salah, He actually loves praying. He loves fasting, although technically, religiously, he's not required to. So on the Day of Judgment, he's not going to be questioned about praying and fasting. So they have the fast track on the Day of Judgment.
So tell me, because a lot of the time, again, this is probably due to our ignorance and the lack of training on how to speak to those who are less abled. So it does extend to those who have Down syndrome, but also, for example, children or young adults who have autism. You do feel like, okay, this is not, astaghfirullah, not a normal person. So how do I speak to them? You know, what is it like speaking to Sayyid Ali, right?
Sayyid Ali.
What's it like speaking to him on a day-to-day basis?
So with Down syndrome, it's completely different than autism. And I think, you know, growing up, I was around all of this because, first of all, my brother went to a primary school, a mainstream primary school, our primary school. But when he went to a high school, which was a special needs high school, I was exposed to all this disability. And it's interesting because now you hear so much advocacy for disability, but we were exposed to this like 25 years ago. I was around people with autism, people with Down syndrome. So the thing is, with Down syndrome, many of them are very social. So they don't have that aspect of, you know, and many people don't know how to approach people with autism because they kind of, they're not as social as Down syndrome. So with that said, Down syndrome, I think people take a step back because of their physical appearance, so they don't know how to approach them, but they're so social. So recently I put a post out because I was speaking at an event at Haraka, and Ali was so happy because Haidar had hugged him.
Really?
Yeah. So he went home, he said, Haidar, Qazaz hugged me and they welcomed me.
Fantastic.
And he was so happy about he wrote a letter, by the way, to Mullah Nizar. And he gave it to him. So he went home and he was so happy. So with Down syndrome, I'm sure those with autism also, although they may not show it, but I'm sure they also like some sort of social interaction. But with Down syndrome, they actually really are social individuals.
So they do remember, they do recollect, they have the ability to, you know, have a conversation. So what's their limitations then?
So each person with Down syndrome is different. So it's all about intellectual disability. So there's different levels of intellectual disability and how much that affects their intellectual disability. So my brother can speak Arabic and English. He can write Arabic and English. He can, so in WhatsApp groups, he's just writing all the time. But but his intellectual disability is that of a child. So he would type the way my son typed, not my son now is older, probably my second son, the way he would type in a WhatsApp group.
Abbas
probably, and 8 or 9 year old. But what's also sad, and I must mention this because as I said, I feel like we're higher in the path of disability, is that when a parent dies, I truly think those with extreme intellectual disabilities, it's like they're orphans. They become like orphans because they're so dependent in love and work. So on this parent. So when my father passed away, Ali was like an orphan. Like he would go to sleep with his photo.
So he was really attached to his dad.
Really attached, and it was very hard. So there is then you see the differences between a normal developing individual and those with profound disabilities or profound intellectual disabilities.
So extending this, so in the home, he's a character. He's very much well loved. You know, there are ways that you can kind of deal with Sayyid Ali. Extending that now to the local community, you mentioned Haraka or these events. What is your view generally overall with communities welcoming those who are less abled?
I think people are not informed. So they're not informed. They don't really know how to even react to someone that has that ends up having a child with disability or a sibling with disability. As I said, comments like "I'm sorry" or "this is bad" or "Do you know this so and so has a disability or has." So I think it's about really the way you interact, and our communities need to be informed on how they should respond if they find out someone's pregnant or had given a child with someone with Down syndrome. That's number one. Number two, be welcoming, because many of these individuals with disabilities with Down syndrome, they're not as disruptive as individuals with autism. And I mention this because in Muharram, I was at an event and I was sitting down with my daughter, and there was a child next to us that was very, very loud and very, for example, was vocal stemming, so he was making very repetitive vocal sounds. They were flapping his hands. And even the mum, I think, because that reflects on the parents, the mum kept saying, "Oh, sorry, my son has autism." And I told her, I'm the last person you need to apologize to. And last person, like I completely understand. So I think it's all about perception, because the perception of the community then reflects on the parents, and the parents feel like they need to be apologetic. That's number one. But number two, I have found with Sayyid Ali, people have just been welcoming. I don't know if it's connected to Down syndrome and maybe it's different with other disabilities, but people have just been very welcoming.
So on those 2 points, if you can give a practical tip as to how to interact with those who are less abled, specifically with Down syndrome. For example, you said, you know, we're not really taught how to speak to them. So, I mean, I have, in Haraka, there's a few who are kind of less abled that come into the events, because we don't stigmatize, and we kind of have a very open, like, hey, you're just one of us. We don't care what physical appearance you have. But from your perspective, what are the biggest tip that you can give in terms of someone who wants to interact with those who are less abled?
I think just interact with them like you would interact with anyone else. So approach them, say salam, even if they don't give you eye contact, even if they seem disengaged, it's not a reflection of maybe what they feel inside. So just interact with them like you would interact with any of them. And I would say give them even more interaction and more attention, because they need that. And many times they are overseen. So to give them that extra interaction could have a very, very positive impact in their life. So I would say give them no. And by the way, in Haraka, when I finished that lecture, the loudest salawat came from an individual in a wheelchair.
That's Sayyid Haidar.
And I just looked at him straight away when I finished, and I was like, MashaAllah, the loudest salawat came from him.
He's our Haraka mascot. He's the loudest salawat, the loudest jawab when it comes to like recitations.
MashaAllah.
He's always there in the beginning. He's always there at the end.
MashaAllah.
One time, you know, I'm sitting down kind of preparing, but he'll kind of scoot over to me, and then I felt like, you know what, let me have a normal conversation with him. And I was very surprised because people, you know, once you overstep that boundary of, oh, he's less abled, you then actually find out, I can have a very normal conversation. You went to school? Yeah, I went to school. What did you learn? I learned this. When do you go? This. I had a very, very normal conversation. So I guess it's just kind of trial and error as well in a way. Just have that conversation, get out of that comfort zone. And once you're out of that comfort zone, it becomes a very, very normal thing. Now, so Sayyid Haidar who sings like Salaam alaikum, Salaam alaikum. It's so normal for him to be around. So okay, that's point number one. So just having that conversation, treating them like a normal person. Point number two, you mentioned, I think it was well-being. Welcoming, sorry. So what else can the centers do in order to be a bit more welcoming, other than just having that normal conversation?
I think accessibility is very, very important, because even my brother, I know he's got Down syndrome and he's physically abled, but there are moments where he was in a wheelchair or he was using an aid. And there are some mosques that I'm not going to mention their names, but some mosques, they will have events downstairs, and that stairs, he just couldn't go to the mosque. So that accessibility is so important, and I think we've overlooked that for a very, very long time, but we need to make every single mosque accessible to all. Because Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was an individual that was blind in his time, and people used to hold his hand and take him to the mosque, and he said, I don't feel comfortable with individuals doing that. The Prophet told them, tie a string from his house, a rope from his house to the mosque. So every time he wants to go to the mosque, he is able to take the string and go to the mosque by himself. So that accessibility to all, Islam is for all races, all abilities, all individuals. So we need to ensure that. So I think accessibility, welcoming them. Also, I'll mention one point is that we need to have programs for the disabled. Because we have to remember that children with disabilities become adults with disabilities, and then they get lost in the system, because even the system in school, they have primary school, high school, special needs school, then there's adult services for like college. After that, it stops, and they get lost in the system. And then there's a lot of adults I know in our community that are disabled that no one knows about, because there's nothing really that could engage them.
So what type of programs are you talking about? Like a program dedicated for those who are just less abled?
I think we need to have organizations for special needs and for those less abled. So then the way they talk, the way that we talk to them, the way that we interact with them, we really engage them. If not, then make our mosques welcoming to all of them as well.
As a side note, why do you think parents and those who families who have less abled individuals within their family, do you think they shy away from coming to the mosque? And why do you think that happens?
They do shy away. And I even once I had a live show, and a woman called in, she goes, we don't go to the mosque because her son had autism. And I think it's more the disabilities, the intellectual disabilities, or the disabilities that are more you may classify as disruptive or don't sit down, ADHD, those individuals, they will shy away from because of the stigma attached to it and people not understanding. Even, for example, and I said this, we had a Amanati conference, and I said this in the conference. Before that conference, an Iraqi lady came up to me, she just said, I saw a poster you put on Instagram. I said, it's for the disabled, how we can make our mosques more accessible to disabled. She said, ليش جايين الحسيني? Like, they don't understand anyway, why are they coming? They could just stay at home, and the parents are making more trouble for themselves. So sometimes it's that mentality that is present, and it's very sad because you do see it, and we like to make it sound like we're all welcoming to the disabled, but we're not.
We're not actually.
We're not, and even so just that perception makes people shy away and makes people hide their kids with disabilities because of the stigma surrounding it.
They feel like it's a shame to have someone who is disabled in their life. Just to round up, I'm just conscious of time and of course your time as well. Just to round up, we did mention in the off air that the question that was posed to you in terms of what are the opportunities there are in looking after Sayyid Ali. I shied away from using challenges because a lot of people see it as a challenge. You mentioned, for example, I'm sorry, that you have this in your family. Like number one, it was our fault, and number two, I'm suffering for it. I'm not suffering. This is so from your side, living with Sayyid Ali. What are the opportunities that you found that you can share with the audience?
I've now, especially that my father's passed away, we've taken a more active role in my brother's upbringing and his looking after him and helping my mother look after him. I truly believe, and I'll say this clearly, I truly believe when I'm around him or I look after him, I feel closer to God. And I feel like
it humbles you in a way.
It does humble. It does humble. Seeing someone that I know is very close to, because Allah says, that the closest to Him or the most honourable to Him is with taqwa. It's not about how intellectually, your intellectual ability is the taqwa. And I really truly believe these people are pure, especially those with profound intellectual disabilities. Number one, I feel closer to God. Number two, in that sense, He's the one that reminds us to pray. He's the one that reminds us to read Quran. He's the one that reminds us to do all that. So I do feel closer to God, and I feel like this is a duty that God has given us and a blessing that God has given us. And on the day of judgment, I know 100% my mother, my father and us, we will see the blessings
Inshallah.
of taking care of him.
Inshallah. Sister Zahra Al Alawi, thank you so much for coming on the show. I do appreciate that it's a very sensitive topic, but it's one that's dear to your heart. But hopefully, maybe in the future, we can have more kind of in-depth discussions about how we can be a bit more inclusive within our community. So thank you very much for coming onto the show.
Thank you very much.
That was Sister Zahra Al Alawi. Many, many thanks to her, and we wish Sayyid Ali all the best, inshallah.